Wow. What Chris and I discussed this a few months ago. We thought we'd have just a little gathering, sign a couple of books, to have a little conversation, put it on film. And wow, this community has come out en masse, which bespeaks volumes to a lot of things. One is Chris Olsen has a personality, and he is. Chris' family and their impact on this community, the legacy of Lucille Ball, and so many aspects that the quality, the quantity is just remarkable. And I'm excited about tonight. I'm excited about tonight to learn more about Chris Olsen's labor of love and where he has his photo book, which is sold out, by the way. And for those who are interested, please feel free to sign up afterwards. Chris will make sure not only you'll get it, but he'll sign it if you want him to for an extra upcharge now. He's now Chris Olsen, superstar author. By the way, in case you're curious, when this was released on Amazon, it became the #1 photo book when it was released. So, Chris Olsen, congratulations. 29 years ago, these are little factoids, 29 years ago, in fact, Lucille Ball passed away. This is to the day, the date she died. And when she passed away from this life into her eternal legacy as really the queen of comedy and Jamestown's most famous native. Of course, present company excluded. Let's assume we're all still in play. But that's a fact. A little bit, by the way, I should introduce myself in case you don't know. I'm Greg Peterson, one of the co-founders of the Jackson Center. And it's a segue to Robert Jackson and Lucille Ball, and you wonder, how does that possibly work? Watch me. One, this Jackson Center was founded in 2001 to advance the legacy of Justice Robert H. Jackson. I got to tell a story. Tell a story that one of our early board members was a guy named Randy Sweeney, who everybody knows. And Randy Sweeney and I were walking around this Scottish Rite Consistory, which had not seen a lot of attention for a long period of time. We sauntered up into the attic. We sauntered up into the attic looking for what we knew was Robert Jackson was a 33rd degree Mason. This is the Scottish Rite Consistory. He was a member of the Scottish Rite Consistory. We were looking for that moment, that letter, that something with Robert Jackson's signature on it, which tied him to this building. And in fact, we did up in the attic. And I can only tell you the attic, if I describe it, think about a nesting place for pigeons for about 30 years. Enough said. But over in a corner was a box, a wooden box. And at the top of it, it read Scottish Rite Review. Scottish Rite Review. Now, this was the Scottish Rite Consistory. And in 1920, early 20s, this was a livery stable, and the Scottish Rite Consistory converted it into a theater. So they could do classwork, among other things, and open it to community activities and community theater. Well, anyways, within this box, Scottish Rite Review, I opened it up, blew off whatever I blew off, and there inside was a playbill. There was a playbill, and on the playbill said, Scottish Rite Review, directed by Bill Bemis. And I opened up inside, and here this was a 1927 playbill. Lucille Ball was born in 1911. And there she was, an actress. In this particular Scottish Rite Review, Lucille Ball, who obviously was right here. Now, the postscript to that story, because that in and of itself is sort of neat. Lucille Ball in this building. I told that story to Desi Arnaz later that year, because she was here during the first Lucy Fest. Told her about this. She was amazed that we found it. I showed her the playbill, and she goes, "When did you find that?" I said, "November 15th, 2001. And I go, "How do you know that, Greg?" I went home and dictated a memo. I did what George Panabianco always does, dictates memo. George is working on one right now. He's billing his time while he's here today. This is unbelievable. Yeah. And he put in for mileage, too. That's an amazing thing. So anyways, so I said November 15th, 2001. She goes, oh, my gosh, I can't believe it. That is 50 years. 50 years to the date of the first airing of I Love Lucy. And she firmly believed that somehow, some way, Lucy's spirit put Randy and I up in the attic to find that thing here. I'm not so sure, but there we are. Also in the book, for those that have it, there was a quote in the book where somebody had written to Robert Jackson. There's a picture of Robert Jackson in here, and I thank Chris for shouting out to the Jackson Center. And it was a comment that Robert Jackson recalled receiving correspondence, and it was entitled, to Jamestown's most famous, is the Justice Jackson, to Jamestown's most famous alum. And he says, it's a good thing Lucille Ball didn't get that far. And hence, Jackson was immediately put down quite a bit. As you know, Lucille Ball didn't quite graduate from JHS, though she did attend. We're here tonight to honor this moment in time, February 6th through the 7th, 1956. It was a magic moment, and many of you here either attended it, because you told me about it, some of you participated in it, and some of them participated more than others, and we're going to have conversation as we go through today. I, for one, was there. I'm one of those 5-year-old little kids out there in the rain, and I have no recollection of seeing Lucille Ball. Great recollection of seeing Desi Arnaz in the rain. There's pictures all over the book. That's my recall. And as it turns out, my mother not only dutifully scrapbooked the whole event, told me exactly where I was standing when she and I saw, and with my brother Randy, saw that, and also kept the paper intact of the picture of Janice Swanson being kissed by Desi Arnaz, which is the same paper, I believe, that was in today's Post-Journal. So there was a whole connect, and my mother walked me through that in the form of scrapbook. So I can identify with much that went on here just as a 5-year-old. I know most of you are shocked to think that I'm that old, but it's okay. It's okay. I mentioned the fact that the books, and there was to be a book signing afterwards. If you decided to come just moments ago to get the book signed, ain't going to happen. You can sign up for it. But you also need to know that all the proceeds, all the money you spent tonight, 100%, Chris is donating to charity, to the Chautauqua Region Community Foundation Fund. And one of them was the Lucille Ball Scholarship Fund. And I just want to call out, because I was introduced, it was John Morgan over here. He was the very first winner in 1957 of the Lucille Ball Scholarship Fund, which got you kind of funds for 2 years at JCC, right? So could you stand up and be recognized? So we're going to talk, to Chris's credit, it's just amazing. He's an amazing individual. He's provided this to charity. But what we're going to do today is talk about his book, the reason he did the book, some of the people who were part of that event. But it all starts in Jamestown, New York. And it all starts with the fact that she was born here in Jamestown, New York. And we have very much to be proud of here in Jamestown, New York. And very much that's going to happen. But before we call the mayor, I do want to shout out to our county executive, George Barillo. George is here. Magnificent job on the speech yesterday. George, if you could stand and get applause. Back there and up in the cheap seats, I could see that. Well, unlike Chautauqua, you can sit anywhere and there's no premium seating. Also, Journey Gunderson, Chief Executive Officer of the National Comedy Center. I saw Journey come in. Journey, are you still with us? She's late? Okay, she came. Okay, perfect. And we have also a historian extraordinaire in the front row, Helen Ebersole. Helen, who's written just about everything, and at an age of which I will not disclose, because then all our conversations will end. But I'm so thrilled to have Helen here, right over there, and she had an idea, which she made a serious mistake, saying, I would like to write something about Robert Jackson, and then she filled in a blank, and I said, done. And so, at this age, so thank you, Helen. And the other thing, we were talking about this, we got Chris, we got all this crowd. Maybe what you could do, which would be really unique, Helen, we could bring out the book you wrote on Robert Jackson, and Chris could sign that, because that would be a real one-off. There you go. Could you do that, Chris? Yeah, very perfect. Now I'd like to call up really the mayor of the city of Jamestown, Mayor Sam Teresi, who really goes back to a long period of time as mayor here, but before that, Department of Development. He was there when they tried to bring in Lucille Ball for a variety of reasons in 1989. And he's also part of the book. There are two really folks who wrote on the book, in the book. One is Chris Olsen, and the other is Sam Teresi. And Sam wants equal credit, so here he is. Mayor Teresi.
Both Chris and Greg asked me to say a couple of words to you today, and I've learned long ago that when Greg Peterson tells me to be someplace and speak, I'm there and I speak. So I learned that long ago. And Chris isn't a longtime friend of mine, but we've become good friends in recent years. And it also, speaking of Greg Peterson, brings me a lot of great pleasure to say that while he was there in 1956 to see Lucy, I wasn't yet even a twinkle in my parents' eyes at the time. So. But I've become a bit of a Lucy devotee, always been a big Lucy fan, and actually in Lucy's hometown, I really love Desi too. Desi was one of my heroes. But it was August 2010, and I was just walking off of Teresi Plaza with about 2,000 other people. George Pontebianco, Journey Gunderson, Tom Benson, and a few others had this crazy idea of establishing a world record here in Jamestown of the most people dressed up and impersonating Lucy on the planet. And we established, I think, some type of world record that's still in the Guinness World Book of Records. And as I was walking off the plaza, with a great sigh of relief because I was concerned the plaza was going to collapse or somebody was going to die of heat exhaustion up there. It was a crazy, wild scene. A young man came up to me as I was walking off the steps of the plaza, and he says, "You're the mayor, aren't you?" And I says, "Yeah." He says, "My sister and you graduated together." And I said, "Really?" He says, "My sister Sharon Olsen." I says, "Of course, absolutely." And he said, he introduced himself. "What are you doing?" "I'm an attorney out in Los Angeles." And he started talking about how proud he was of our city and how proud he was to be a Jamestowner and still a Jamestowner in heart. And started talking about all of the good things from his Forest for the Trees perspective were happening in the community. And I really had a bounce in my step at the end of that conversation. And then he started talking about all the things that he would like to do and to be part of the community, even though he and his family were rooted in Southern California. This was still home to him. And he aspired to come back here and do great things to help us build on the progress that we were starting to see back in 2010. And then he started talking about Lucy. And I said, "How in the world does a guy like you become a complete Lucy devotee and nut?" And he told me about the picture and his mom, and that how he was starting to collect other pictures of that 1956 event here in Jamestown. And he said very casually and flippantly at the time, he says, "Who knows, maybe I'll do a book someday of that event." And I said, "Great idea." And that started a friendship and an association that we've been going back and forth ever since. And let me tell you something. Much like Lucy, This guy may be living in Southern California, and he may have left Jamestown, but Jamestown never left him. And really proud to call him my friend, proud to have him back here, stunned by the beautiful piece of artistry that he has put together, and so humbled that he asked me to be a part of it. Now I've got to share a quick little story with you from yesterday. We had set up the signing photo op of my book, and our other good friend, Scott Kinberg, came in to take the photograph. And I want to thank Scott for some discretion that he showed in my office for the photo op, because he could have published another killer photo on the front page of the newspaper today. Because you can't see it right here, but Chris laid into me with a right hook and laid me right out on the ground in my own office. My staff was laughing, nobody called the police up, and Scott didn't snap the picture. And there's still a little mark left on my chin there. And we had the Post-Journal paper from 1956, and I turned to him and I said, buddy, I got to tell you this. I said, your mom was smoking hot. I got to tell you. Boom! There I go down. So well, in a much different way, Chris is smoking hot. He's put together a smoking hot book, and Jamestown will be a better place because this guy is going to continue to find a way to get back here and involve himself in this community as he already has. And I want you just to take a moment and join me with a thank you round of applause for Chris Olsen and all the other Chris Olsens in this world that are from Jamestown and never leave the place.
By the way, Chris, I wanted to let you know that George Barillo had the key to the county he was going to give to you, but he locked it in his car. Well, Chris is coming up, and we'll start the interview with Chris. I want to call out Lloyd Faulkner right here. Lloyd's in the front row. He was the owner of the house known as the Cracker Box. And so I just wanted to just say, welcome, glad you're here. And some of those photographs, you know, are of that particular visit. So thank you.
Desi was tucking in as his son. And we just met him, I did tonight for the first time, so thank you, Lloyd, for being here.
And I think some of those photos may have been your family's photos, right? I think some of them, yeah. So anyways, we're delighted to have Lloyd here. It was just another connect, and there are many, and at some point we may open it up as to people who actually have those connections. So let's get at it, Chris.
I'd like to steal Greg's thunder and thank him and everyone at the Jackson Center for hosting this. I think most of you have been in here, but if you haven't, what a beautiful facility. And let's have a round of applause for Greg and the Jackson Center.
And to put a name to the center, Susan Murphy, who was in the doorway, Sherry Shutter, Marion Beckerink, and Allie Johnson. And anybody else want to lay claim? Okay. So you did a book.
I did a book.
You weren't going to do a book. You were going to do a film.
I know. It switched to a book. It was easier, actually. Than
what was the moment in time? You're gathering all this stuff. What was the moment that said, gee, I better do a book maybe easier?
Well, you know, it really hit me. We also have some great interviews with several of the people who are here tonight that you're all going to hear from that are ready to go. And Michael Levine, who edits most of Ken Burns' film, did the first 9 minutes that you saw a piece of, and he's going to help us finish it. And if I can steal him away from Greg in the center, Ed's going to help us on completing it as well. But about when we were assembling the documentary, I'm a historian, as are you, and I just love these images. And they really, when I saw them in sequence for the documentary, where I tried to trace Lucy's steps, where they left Los Angeles all the way through to the arrival, the parade, and I was like, this tells its own story. And so it really was so visual to me. I was like, if we can add some of the words from these people that were there and supplement with Mom, who had her own stories, and the great reporting in the Post-Journal back then. I mean, just page after page. And for those of you that might remember, Post-Journal had 2 editions back then. So, I mean, it was like double the coverage. Every morning, evening, you had double the pictures, double the stories. And it really just kind of came together from there.
So First of all, not everybody knows about you. You, Chris Olsen, a guy born in was it Westwood Drive?
Well, almost. So this is 56. 58, Dad smartly put a ring on Mom's finger after Desi kissed her. And they always wanted to go to California, so they drove cross country with $300, drove to Redondo Beach, said, this is where we want to live. They walked up a block, found a place to live. The lady's like, well, do you kids have jobs? Not yet. Oh, don't pay me till you get a job. And my dad, these aerospace guys will appreciate, he went and worked at Rocketdyne and was very instrumental. He graduated at Alfred with a ceramic engineering degree, worked in the space program. So I was actually born in California in 1964 on April Fool's Day, which is my sister Sharon's birthday 4 years earlier. But before I was 1, we moved back to Jamestown. And we stayed at Colony Motel, as I heard the story, because I don't remember it, obviously. And my mom and dad wanted to live on the west side, so they went to 21 Westwood, which is where I grew up, and knocked on the door. And my dad said, would you ever consider selling this house? The guy goes, no, I built it for myself, but I'm a realtor, so yeah, I'd sell it. So then that became my childhood home, and most of my friends here from class of 82, way to represent, have been in there, and it was just a lovely place to grow up.
When did your mother kind of showcase this picture that's on your wall in your law office of this Uber star named Desi Arnaz planting her a kiss?
What's really funny is, for those of you that knew my father, and every time I come, I hear stories, and Russ, thank you for several, which I can't repeat today, but of my dad. And my dad loved the limelight. He loved being in the paper. He loved sports. He loved the Post-Journal. He loved anything. But my mom was the exact opposite. So she was very humble. And, you know, you would think she'd have that featured in the house growing up, but she really didn't. She had a red traditional photo album where you peel the plastic off, and it was all the photos that they had given her for being the homecoming queen. And, you know, for those of you that don't know the story, the Retail Association of Jamestown helped sponsor the cost of bringing Lucy in, so Bigelow's and all the downtown stores, the Furniture Mart. And so in every store you went, in every paper, there was a tear-out ballot. And is Nancy Hernan's brother still here? Is it Rick? Is he still here? I think he had to leave as well. One of the other court, and Marlene, you know who he is. He's an attorney in Warren. He came up, and his sister was one of the homecoming court. So she's in the book. But 14,000 people voted. That was more than voted for mayor that year, because Teresi wasn't running. And Mom won. So she got, Lucy's dressmaker made her dress, which we still have in Los Angeles, and all the local stores gave her jewelry, and it really, my mother, who's the most humble, non-spotlight seeking person, was thrust into the biggest spotlight, you know, certainly in Jamestown, maybe arguably in the United States at that time. And so when I saw the photo, I just knew, I'm like, there's no way in 56, and I do a little entertainment, like 56, there's still the studio system. So if Lucy or Desi says, you're in my movie, you're in their movie. And I was like, there's no way. Lucy came across the country, and there's like 2 photos, you know. And so I started doing the research, and as you know, once you peel that first layer of the onion, I found more from Scott Kimberg in the Post-Journal, and more from the Fenton, and more from Prendergast. And then I went to the Library of Congress, and there was a magazine called Look Magazine, which half of the audience will remember, but it was essentially the equivalent of Life magazine. And they had sent a photographer named Charlotte Brooks, embedded her from Los Angeles to Jamestown. And what a lot of people don't know is Lucy and Desi went on a 9-city tour. So they didn't just come to Jamestown. They premiered it here, but they also showed it in Chicago, New York City, Philadelphia, Dallas. And this photographer went the entire way. And so the pictures you see in the book, from the train to the intimate moments with Desi to Jamestown on the stage at the Palace, are from this tremendous photographer who's since passed. And so once I hit that, you know, when you have that nirvana moment, like when you find the Scottish Rite program, and you just know there's something special there, that really is what kind of lit a fuse to take it to the next level.
So the next level is the book, and you talk about the various, it was a labor of love, but a love letter to your mom.
For sure.
And what else? What other kind of emotions drew that book?
Well, you know, it's interesting. So a lot of Mom's dear friends are here, and she sends her love. She's 83 and still mentally sharp as a tack. As some of us know, arthritis is taking kind of a toll, so she doesn't travel all that much, but she wanted to let you know she's appreciative of all you being here and supporting her son. And she was the first one that encouraged me to be a writer. Probably have to send a shout out to Bruce Wyden, who's in the room, and Mrs. Swanson, two of my teachers, Kurt Sauls. And I gave him a book but said, you got to promise not to grade it. That's the only so, anyway, but what else came to me was, I'll be honest with you, there's a time I sat on the runway leaving, having seen those images. I'm getting emotional now. And just what Jamestown means to me, my family. And so one story, I still call it home, but this brings it home. So August 3rd, 79, and by the way, Scott Kimberg and I are doing a book on Thurman Munson and my dad called 727. So the night before my father died playing church softball, some of you were there. Edit this out, Ed, by the way. At Jones and Gifford, my entire life I never drove down that street just because I wanted to avoid it. And so a summer ago I went back and my kids were there. So we stayed on second base where my dad collapsed. And my now 17-year-old goes, Dad, you should finish running the bases because Grandpa Ted never got the chance. And I go, that's a terrible idea. Why? That's a great idea. I said. So I finished running the bases. And if you want to know what Jamestown, New York's about, so I'm just recovered like I am now and pretty happy about the whole thing. My kids got to experience it. And we get in the van, the rental van, and I look at this field, and it's 35 years later. And there's a carved wooden sign that says Olsen Field. Somebody carved and put up there. And through all the winters, it stayed up there, And the funny part was it could not have been a very good friend because they spelled Olsen wrong, which would have really pissed my dad off. But the thought was still there. So the emotions I got that I shared with you all, my wife kills me because I probably have cried more than she has her whole life. But that's what Jamestown is. That's the people, and that's what brings me back, brings my family back. And what I love is my kids who never lived here associate this as part of their upbringing as well.
So now you've put together this book, this love letter to your mom, your family, Jamestown, and you've been signing the books here.
Yes.
I mean, people have actually purchased them, and some, like myself, have actually read it and learned. By the way, you may think this is just a photo book, which is how it's categorized at Amazon, by the way. But it's more than that. There is quite a narrative to it. And if you want to know a synopsis of the life of Lucille Ball, certainly various individuals who were part of that, he's done a phenomenal job in synthesizing. Sometimes you have to pick up Lucy books that are like this. In about 10 pages, you get the full story so that you can walk into a cocktail party and sound intelligent. So that's an art form. And that just shows your legal background, your writing background, and to all you English teachers who have taught him, you did it well. I would not have the guts to show anything to certainly Mrs. Kurtzall. I had her, and no guts, no glory, buddy.
Right.
Let me tell you.
I understand.
So you get the book, and you're signing out there, and you're meeting all these people, and there's got to have been just as in going through the line. I met some people who you probably wished you had known to put into the book. Who are some of those tonight?
I just called my publisher to say we got volume 2 coming. No, but well, Lloyd was fantastic. He was one of the first ones here, and that's the other thing I love about Jamestown. And since we've been here, and Chip knows, just last night associating with people, everybody's like, oh yeah, that's my uncle. He's coming into town. He's on your panel. And Tony Cosimano's in from New York, and he brought his sister. And just so many little stories. And the other one that hit me was Nancy Hernan, who's in half a dozen pictures that was part of the Queen in her court. So Mom, the 4 or 5 other girls, and her got to go everywhere Lucy and Desi went that weekend. And when you look through the book, first of all, thank you for the support for the Community Foundation. And really, what I like, everyone was applauding the book, but it's the people at Jamestown in the book that really, most of you know a lot of the people in there. And what was exciting to me, if you look at the cover of the book, Lucy, it's 1956, so I Love Lucy's been on for whatever, 5 or 6 years. We still need Journey here for the details. It was going to run a couple more years, but she's the biggest star in the universe. And if you look at her face, and thank you to John Larson, who helped me on a lot of these images that needed to be touched up a little bit, including that one. But if you look out, Lucy's looking out the window, and she herself doesn't really know what to expect. She hadn't been home in 10 years, Greg, and she's kind of tentative. And then as you flip through the book and you see the reception she got, and you go all the way to the end when they had 2 premieres actually at the Palace, 7 and 10 p.m. At the 10 p.m. show, she's seated on the Palace stage with her shoes off in a formal gown addressing family and friends, because she knew the people that knew her before she was anybody, when she had nothing, loved her and welcomed her. And Desi, Mr. Mayor, to your point, as you know, we talked about yesterday, Desi's father was very prolific, successful mayor of Santiago, Cuba. And Desi is quoted in the Post-Journal as saying, I want to bring Lucy to my hometown. I can only hope she would get the reception like Jamestown, New York's given her. I've never seen anything like it in my entire life. And Lucy's quoted in the Post-Journal, which I share in the book. And, you know, she's won Emmys. She's been on every cover of every magazine. And at the premiere, she goes, this is the greatest thing that's ever happened to me my whole life.
By the way, I want to call out Bruce Nelson here. Bruce was the chauffeur of your mother, and probably the court too, right? So you had the premier job of squiring the Queen, Miss Jamestown herself. That was your job.
Beautiful car, and thank you so much. And just as the story goes, that was the same time as the 1,000 Lucys on City Hall. And you know, having a little bit of my dad, and we came from California. They're going to recreate the Kiss.
A little bit of your dad in him? Yikes.
They're going to recreate the Kiss. They got the Desi impersonator from Universal, and my twin nieces, Jenny and Jessie, are dressed up, and they're going to be. And so we come, and they put us like in the back of this sedan that you couldn't even see out of, or nor could anyone see in. And I said, this ain't going to work. So we're over by Lincoln. I go, Mr. Nelson, could we get in your car? He goes, sure. It was convertible, this black 47. We rolled it up, put magnets on the side. It was awesome. So thank you. Thank you for that.
Another celebrity, if you can get his autograph. Good luck. The actual storyline itself, were there any surprises? I mean, you saw the highlights there, the coming across the country. It was really, what, a 13-day trip?
Yeah, even a couple days longer, yeah.
Yeah. And they actually got to New York City, the Ed Sullivan Show.
Night before, in the same day, Ed Sullivan, and then What's My Line?
And the particular pilot who was the feature of What's My Line actually had a story unto himself, didn't he? Wasn't he one of the first helicopter licensed people?
He was, and I know David's going to talk a lot about that, but he was, and also a fellow Jamestown classmate. They weren't contemporaries the same years, but he was the guy for Bell Aircraft, and Bell Aircraft, literally one of the founders of aviation, and we have some people here that are going to talk about some of that. But Floyd, legendary in the aviation world, and as the story goes, Lucy leaned over to him in the helicopter and said, Floyd, you ever flown over Niagara Falls? He said, no. You want to go? Boom, they went. So
And the weather was pretty inclement coming down. As I recall reading, he literally had to kind of follow the tracks.
He did. He abandoned, they had a specific flight plan, and because of the weather conditions, for visibility, he abandoned that and just followed the train tracks from Buffalo to Jamestown.
What'd your mother say about the book?
She's so proud. I mean, I'm a mama's boy, there's no doubt about it. And, to have her, she always, I say in the acknowledgments, I literally remember her reading me The Little Engine That Could. I think I can. So I said in the back of the book, I think I can, Mom, thank you. And so she loves it, and she loved me being a writer. And, after Dad passed, she put me through college and law school and my sisters through. And just to have her, she loves Jamestown too, and she felt really grateful that the images and the words and the stories people told captured it in a way that hopefully you guys get as much out of it as we did. But she was proud mama.
Did you get a sense, because this is all happening very rapidly, from being one of 5 to all of a sudden being the queen, literally, and then all of a sudden a blur of activities with Lucy, Desi, Kiss, now, many years later, does she have a pretty good, clear recollection of what happened, or is it a kind of a buzz?
She really does. Well, what's interesting, at the end of it all, Lucy said, honey, you were so great all week. Why don't you come to Hollywood and I'll put you in movies? And my dad and her weren't engaged yet. And she goes, well, I kind of have a serious boyfriend, and I think we're going to settle down. He's going to finish his. So I always say, Mom, you could have had Oscar, but you got us instead, you know. But really, so if you distill the whole whirlwind down, the story Mom likes to tell, which is in the book, at the Hotel Jamestown, so they had the sports dinner, which Randy and Scott are going to talk about, but you want to talk about a dais to end all daises. I mean, it's unbelievable. And the people were lingering. And so Hotel Jamestown was so packed, people had to eat in other rooms. They weren't even in the main banquet room. It was so overflowing. But, you know, from a producing spec, probably not the best thing. They also were going to do the ball that night after the sports dinner. So they had to clear everybody out. Nobody wanted to leave because they knew Lucy and Desi and their mom, Lucy's mom, were coming back. And then, so it took an extra hour. But during the ball, it was going to be a dance at Hotel Jamestown. And it was so crowded, Greg, nobody could dance. If you could stand, you didn't have room to stand. So what touched Mom and the way she tells it is Lucy and Desi had to stand on the table. Are you okay, honey? Across the Hotel Jamestown bar. I'm okay, I'm okay. Are you okay? And all night they were checking on each other. And just that little moment registered with my mom. No matter what happened later in life and their differences and they divorced, and she knew they were just madly in love with each other and cared about each other. And as we say at the end of the book, after Lucy passed, Desi said, I love Lucy was never just a title.
Chris, we're going to take a break because obviously Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz had to get here.
Yes.
Had to come to Jamestown. So we just talked about and saw What's My Line, the guy from Bell Aircraft that got him here. And now we've got the pleasure of Dave Ebersole, Helen's son, who is one of the extraordinary docents, curator, man of all about time. Okay. I'll build him up, you know. Helen's son again. All right, here we go. So, David, why don't you give us a little bit background, a little bit about Bell and what happened there? Thank you, David.
Great to be back. Back on this stage. Haven't been here in a while. In fact, last time I was on the stage was spring of 1969. I was in a play with the Jamestown Little Theater. I was a junior at Southwestern. This was the Scottish Rite. Little Theater did their shows here. Their offices was a building on Fairmount. There was an old Howard Johnson's, right where Bridgeotis is. It was so exciting as a high school kid to get to work at a Little Theater with adults. It was fun. It was exciting. I worked with Pete Dawson the following year. And in reading some history of Little Theater, I came upon a little story. In 1929, the first decade of Little Theater, their first director, Madeline Osgood, I knew her, discovered this high school girl in 1929. Encouraged her to, take a step up from high school theatricals and do some work with the adults. And of course, that was Lucy. And that brings us back to here. Now, here I am from the Niagara Aerospace Museum. We do aviation history in Western New York. Giants such as Glenn Curtiss, giants like Lawrence Bell. Lawrence Bell founded his company in 1935, and from the outset, the company was innovative, consistently creating and developing advanced technology in flight. One of those technologies was the helicopter. And as you saw, Lucy and Desi arrived from Niagara Falls by helicopter, and a Bell helicopter, of course. But not just any Bell helicopter. This was Larry Bell's private helicopter. We have that in the museum. I've got some flyers out there by the book table. It's beautiful. Two-tone paint, custom upholstered seating, Larry's initials on the door. Larry was good friends with Lucy and Desi. He provided this service on a number of occasions. They went on to collaborate on with Desi Lou with a primetime TV show called Whirlybirds. It was about helicopters. Bell did the technical support. Now, it's hard to see in the picture. Lucy's got that hat that we see. Desi's wearing a lovely tweed overcoat, a fedora, and a scarf. Chris had a couple pieces from this wonderful home movie of the event. And one segment, I love this. Desi's in a parade down 3rd Street. He's standing in the back of an open convertible in February. And he's wearing the same coat, same scarf, and he's waving the same hat. And you see, moving behind you, landmarks. You see a little glimpse of the old City Hall, which, according to my researcher, Norman Carlson, was torn down in 1971. And then following it comes the sign, the Humidor. Remember that place? And I'm sitting there looking, I'm having a moment. Yeah. I said, that's Jamestown. By the way, I got this gig because none of the other curators or docents or executives at the museum wanted to do it. And I'm the junior guy, which tells you how old they are. And the irony is, none of them know Jamestown. So, there we are in front of the Bell factory. You see it's a beautiful February day. And, of course, the third person is Floyd Carlson. And in fact, I don't know if you can just make out, inscribed in the right side of the photograph is a little autograph from Lucy to Floyd. Okay, I've got one more for you. Next picture. All right. Now here's a story I got from Hugh Neeson, who's the director of the museum. This is inside the Bell factory before they left. And there's a lovely little tale, cute little tale. I'm trying to get as much of Hugh's voice as I can. Hugh says, well, we had this big room. Hugh had a long career at Bell. At this point, he was in his first year as an engineer. He said, we had this big room you can see. Over 100 engineers, tables, drawing boards. Everybody's working in there. The loudspeaker comes on. And it says, Mr. Bell is bringing some VIP guests. And at this point, I stopped. I said, Hugh, did you know this was Lucy? He said, no, nobody knew. He says, they walk in. And he says, well, you can imagine a flutter went through the room. Now, Hugh tells me, there was a drill here when you had guests. You were expected to stay in your seat, do your work, not get up and make a fuss. So they're working at it, they're working. Now, Hugh, he says, was just off the left edge of the picture. Just to the right, you see a man sort of standing up with his back to the camera, okay? Well, Lucy and Desi and Larry are doing the tour. That guy grabs a file folder and a marker and writes in big letters, I am from Jamestown. And of course, he holds it up. Lucy sees it. Of course, she stops the tour, and she's over talking Jamestown with them. They find out there are people they both know. The three gentlemen on the right side of the picture are in suits and holding cigarettes. The one in the middle is Larry Bell. And Hugh says, oh, yeah, Larry looks really annoyed because we're behind schedule now. This is history. This is history. This is what we do at the Niagara Aerospace Museum. It's what you do here. The Lucy Desi, the National Comedy, the Robert Jackson, the Fenton. And as I think you can tell, I picked this up at first hand, watching the practice of history. Watching it from my mom. And I learned you got to have passion, and you got to have curiosity. You have to ask those questions and follow those little strings, because pretty soon they're all going to weave together, and you're going to have little theater and the Humidor and helicopters and Lucille Ball, because Larry Bell is definitely there in the event when Lucy comes home. Thank you.
The situation was pretty incredible. I was in the high school band, 15 years old, sophomore in high school, and really thrilled to be there out of that sick bed. And it was probably the weather, the drizzle and such didn't have too much to do with anything as far as we were concerned, as far as I can remember. And of course, the first thing that struck me was the fact that there were there was a helicopter sort of doing a circle over the top of the high school. And that was the first helicopter that I had ever seen flying. And I don't even recall seeing too many helicopters in pictures at that time. They were relatively new. So the excitement of a helicopter landing in the back of our high school on the athletic field was just pretty incredible. It was really exciting.
It's not only exciting, but it was career changing.
Yeah, for someone who had planned their career in music and had set every direction for college and career in music, the helicopter landing that day made such an impression on me that I stayed with it and directed myself, I guess, through all of these various feelings that I had about that particular day into a lifelong career in helicopters.
Which included attending West Point, flying helicopters in the military, Vietnam, and Woodstock.
He was the guy in Woodstock.
Well, we'll back up just a hair.
All right, you're in the sick bed. Go.
No.
Yeah.
I was in the band at West Point, which was a congressional appointment to the music program there, and started flying fixed wing at West Point out of Stewart Air Force Base. And my first airplane instruction was $4 an hour. It was $2 for the instructor and $2 for the airplane. And that brought me to an application to the U.S. Army Flight School. And this was long before Vietnam had become anything in our minds. And so, yes, that's where it started. And it did bring me to Army Flight School, to Vietnam, as you said. Brent brought me back, owning my own company after West Point, just outside of New York City. And, of course, West Point, or the Woodstock Festival. And along with that, becoming very close friends with Floyd Carlson, who was, of course, the helicopter pilot here.
That's all interesting, but let's talk about Woodstock.
60.
I knew you were going to do that.
We just had an event called Woodstock, the music of the First Amendment here. We had Sam Yasgur, who was Max Yasgur's son, and we had all the music and sound, and everybody here wore tie-dye shirts. We were reliving it. And then we saw the helicopters bringing in the performers. I suspect that was one of yours.
Probably so. Initially, I had all the helicopters there, which were two small bells, like we saw up here. This was a very early model. The type that we had at the festival for those two bells were more MASH type with the open tail boom. They looked like an erector set. In any event, yes, had all the helicopters at Woodstock. It was wonderful. Brought a lot of entertainers in.
What were you retained for, though? You weren't there for transport.
No. And initially, our contract was to provide security. And that was to fly the perimeter of the festival so that nobody would get in for nothing.
You don't have a ticket, you're going to get strafed, you know?
And quite honestly, I mean, all we had to do was just be there. And from that point, understand that from the 25,000 people that they expected turned into 450,000. And there isn't a helicopter or a fleet of helicopters in the world that was going to stop anybody from doing anything whatsoever.
So give me a name. Drop a name of an act that you brought in.
Oh, Janis Joplin. I can tell you everybody.
Just a
you know?
small Janis Joplin.
Might have heard of her.
All of the folks. And I personally was operating many helicopters, so I was backstage. And in 1969, we were a startup company. Money was important. Helicopters were very expensive. You had to be a little wacko to be in the business to begin with. I spent a lot of my time with the promoters with my hand out. And I said, you know, in order for us to do the next 2 hours, I have to have X number of dollars. We're buying fuel, we're doing this, we're doing that, and I just kept getting paid and flying. And I unfortunately brought the one, there were two fatalities there that happened in Max Asker's farm, where a tractor had run over one of the fellas. And I ended up bringing him out of there on a mash type thing, which was pretty down. But the rest of the festival, with 450,000 people and doctors and hospitals and people, it was just wonderful.
Back to Lucy.
Yes.
As you reflect back on this, you had a very successful career with helicopter companies, et cetera. But did you see her? I mean, did you see her come in? Were you close enough to even see her come off the helicopter?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I not only saw her coming off the helicopter, as the lead band, we were right there at the hotel, watching everything that happened at the hotel. So we were there.
So you're a trumpeter, right?
I'm a trumpet player, yes.
Still do it?
Yeah, I do.
And you actually marched in John F. Kennedy's inaugural parade.
Lead band.
Lead band.
I told him he's a little bit like Forrest Gump, you know. And as you can, if I can chime in, Greg, so I know he's too humble, he won't say anything, but so for the documentary, he was gracious enough to do an interview, and so we're in a pretty nondescript office setting in a door smaller than that door, and I was running and gunning like I always am. I had to catch a flight. He goes, Chris, you got 5 more minutes? Yeah, I hope you don't mind me telling the story. I go, yeah, I got 5 more minutes. So he opens this little door that I thought was going to be like a closet, and it's a $25 million helicopter. He was building for the president of Under Armour. It's stunning. Larry Bell would be proud, let me tell you. So, and if you wouldn't mind just sharing kind of in summation what you told me in New York City that day about what that day meant to your entire life.
Well, you know, oftentimes when you're in the midst of what we were with Lucy coming to Jamestown and all of the fanfare and everything that was going on with all of us, it takes some time to sit back and reflect. And with me, it took a few years. But the trigger of her being here, of me coming out of a sickbed to be there, the helicopter, and all of the camaraderie and the warmth that we all felt that day, no matter how cold it was and rainy, stayed with me, and it does, and it still does to this day. And I can honestly say that that was the inspiration that I got, saying this is what I want to do the rest of my life. And I understood that, and I still do today.
Well, thank you, Tony Cusimano. Thank you. Thank you, Tony. There was a lot of press that day. The Post-Journal, MGM, they brought in all of their agents, pictures galore, look, and like I said, Post-Journal, a lot of regional activity. There was actually home movies that were being done but nobody covered it closer and better than our next guest, Chip Dawson. So, Chip, if we could have you come up. So, Chip.
Hi, Greg.
Give me your best story about Peter.
Now, we have an agreement. Sorry.
That's not, well, you gave me a couple of notes. So, give us a little biographical background here. Where?
Well, I went to Southwestern, graduated from Southwestern, went to JCC, was in theater programs with Bob Sharman there, who many people know, and was stage manager on this stage for several plays. And in fact, I gave Chris a photograph. He asked for a photograph of about the time when Lucy was visiting. And I sent him one that has me sitting about halfway up in the seats here with my foot up on the back of the seat with my stage manager's notebook open, smiling at Stan Olsen. And Stan Olsen was the chief photographer for the Post-Journal at that time. His daughter and her husband happen to be very good friends of ours now. And Stan took the picture, and that's what I included in one of my reports for Bob Sharman at JCC. So it all goes around, folks. Went from there then to Oklahoma State, graduated from Oklahoma State with a degree in fire protection and another one in social science. Got a commission in the Navy, spent 20 years in the Navy as a surface warfare officer. Left active duty, though, after 5 and went to work for Kodak in Rochester and spent 23 years there. And then consulted with OSHA and other organizations for the last 23 years. So that's what I've been doing.
Quite a career. But it all started right here. It all started with a great deal of chutzpah. That's a Swedish word.
Yeah, yeah, it did.
So here's the picture I'm working off of, the Chip Dawson picture. Look at this here. This is a picture here.
Now up on the screen.
No, now up on the screen, and you'll see one very tall. He's got a crew cut, and there's one guy and 1 million women.
Oh, my. Story of my life.
Wow.
That was the newspaper club at Southwestern. I was a junior that year. And as you see, I was the only male, I think, for the whole time that I was in the newspaper club. And I knew Lucy was coming to town. Of course, like everyone else here, adored her, just thought she was terrific. And I thought, she went to Celeron. And by the way, some of you have been mentioning Jamestown. She actually went to Celeron.
Mostly. She did transfer to Jamestown, but
Did she
you're
transfer?
right. Almost most of it was in Celeron.
But Celeron is really where I knew her as coming from. And a couple of years before she came for the visit, we had a consolidated district. Southwestern was created out of Celeron, Lakewood, and Busti. And so I thought, well, I represent her old school, so I should go and do an interview with her. So I headed down to the Hotel Jamestown that day, and I've lost track. I'm not sure whether it was the day of arrival or the next day or whenever it was. Things are kind of fuzzy about dates for that. But I headed down to the Hotel Jamestown early in the morning, started making friends with a couple of police officers that were standing watch there at the elevators. There were ropes all the way around the lobby, and the lobby was filled with people. Of course, everybody wanted to see Lucy. And I hung around and hung around and hung around, and every once in a while I go up and there's some activity in the elevator up and down. A couple of times Lucy or Desi came up and went down. And finally it got after dinner time, and I thought, this is a lost cause. I'm not going to get an interview with Lucy. And I hung around for a little while longer, and Lucy and Desi came back from whatever they were doing and went upstairs in the elevator. And I saw a woman who I assume was her publicist that stopped and was talking to one of the officers that I'd been talking to. And next thing I know, she turns around and spots me, points me out, and she walks over to me and says, what are you interested in doing? I said, well, I went to Lucy's old school, and I want to get an interview for the school paper. And she said, well, we'll see. And with that, she walked back to the elevator and went back upstairs, and I'm hanging around here again for another 15 minutes. The elevator comes back down, the door opens, she steps out, she looks over and sees me, and she goes like this. And so I walked over, talk about getting emotional, I walked over to the elevator and get in, and as we're going up, she says, Lucy can give you 5 minutes. And I said, okay, that's fine. Now I had with
Before
me,
you get to that, what was the crowd's reaction when you
oh,
get
the
singled
crowd,
out? And
the crowd just whooped and hollered. Of course, they
half
just
cheer
thought
and half
it was
ticked off.
terrific.
They didn't go.
And I had a yellow pad, one of the lined yellow pads with a pencil, like all good reporters are supposed to have. And I had some, what I realize now as I look at some of the questions I'd written out on here to ask Lucy, they were pretty stupid and pretty, But then on the other hand, I was 16 years old. What do you expect? So I get into the suite, and Lucy gets up and comes over and shakes my hand, and I introduce myself to her. She sits back down on the sofa, and she reaches over and pats the seat next to her. So here I am with Lucy for a 5-minute interview. No one else is in the room. I try to remember for Chris whether or not there was a photographer there, and I honestly don't remember much about anything other than I was talking with Lucy. And so I started asking a couple of questions, and I'd scribble some answers down here. And as it turned out, Lucy did the interview. Thank God for Lucy. I love her to this day for any number of reasons, but that being one of them. My 5-minute interview turned into 30 minutes. I think I'm probably, other than Desi, I'm the only guy that was alone with Lucy the whole trip. Think about that. And so we got finished. She asked me questions about school, asked me about myself, just a variety of things. And when she finally said, well, I'm kind of tired, I think I need to go and rest. Desi had gone in to go to bed or take a nap. And she reached over and grabbed my pad and signed it. Thank you, Larry. Now, I go by Chip. I've always gone by Chip, but my real name is Lawrence. And I figured for an interview with Lucy, I ought to at least use Larry. So,
Just in case I'm talking about it 60 years later.
yeah, right, exactly. So here I go. I've got this autograph that says, "Thank you, Larry. Love, Lucy." Pretty special. She was absolutely wonderful. There wasn't any reluctance on her part to spend time with me. And you think about what she'd been through with the weather, the parades, the dinners, the balls, you name it, and pushing all the time. And here she takes 30 minutes for a 16-year-old kid from her old school to give an interview. Pretty remarkable.
You're remarkable in sharing this. This is terrific. You can see the emotion in his eyes, by the way. This is.
So I'm getting Jamestown. We make a lot of wimps. We're all crying up here today.
You want another Woodstock story?
I didn't get to Woodstock. I was on active duty with the Navy during Woodstock, so I was shared of all of that stuff.
We'll talk later. This is
Okay.
great. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Chip
Chip.
Dawson. Part of that whole wild couple of days was a moment in time where Lucy did something which was unheard of. She was asked, or maybe she just barged in, to go to what was otherwise an all-male smoker called the Temple Hazard Sports Dinner. And those who remember...
Raise your hand if you've been to one of those.
I've been to
by
one
the
of
way.
those, and for those that, and I went to many, and you'd walk out with your eyes just bleeding, and so, because the cigar smoke, it was just really tense. And so anyways, here we have this 1956 moment. I don't know if Cy Goldman knew they were coming then and had the dinner because of that, or just it was pure serendipity. Do you know?
My guess is it was pure size serendipity. That's how I like to think of it, but I'd love to know. I don't actually know. But.
So let's call up somebody who might know. So if we could get out of here. And then where's Randy Anderson and Scott Kinberg, the two real rock stars of the Sports Hall of Fame. And nice job today, Scott, by the way, of putting Chris above the fold. It's not easy to do, but when you get the sports guy like him, that's terrific. Randy Anderson is the president of the Chautauqua Sports Hall of Fame. And this all occurred on, by the way, I don't know if there's we got the brochure, but at the Chautauqua Sports Hall of Fame in the March 2018 issue, covers the Temple Hazard Abraham Sports Dinners, and part of the storyline deals with the 1956 Temple Hazard Abraham All-Star Sports Night. And maybe, who's going to do the background? Sky, going to get a little background on just on the dinners themselves, and then maybe Randy, you want to talk about that night?
Well,
We haven't cursed this at all.
well, Greg, as you know, because you were part of that every February for I don't know how many years you went, but
Not that year.
no, and I wasn't like the mayor. I was not even a twinkle in my mom and dad's eye back then. But anyway, my experience with the Hall of Fame started when I was 9 years old, and my dad brought me. And I think my brother just left because he's jealous that he never got to go, being about 6 years younger. So
he was pretty torqued right there. You know?
yeah, I could tell. He must have known that I was going to be on. So he's still mad that he never got to go with me. But anyway, my experience there was like Christmas, birthday, rolled into one. And I look forward to Frank Hyde, the former sports editor at the Post-Journal, putting the photographs and little bios in the Post-Journal leading up to the banquet, and it was every February. So that coincided, obviously, with Lucy and Desi's visit. So my love for the sports night, I went to 5 or 6 of them before they ended in '76, but it was not until a gentleman by the name of John O'Brien from Jamestown a few years ago stopped in the Hall of Fame, and he'd been cleaning out his mom and dad's basement, and they kept newspapers for decades, and he happened to find one from February 8th, 1956, and he said, I think maybe the Hall of Fame would like to have that copy. And I said, well, yeah, of course. And I had never seen it. I opened it up, and wouldn't you know, I don't know if that image, no. The image, I think Randy brought it in from the Hall of Fame, is a photograph of the dais at the Temple Hess, or of that sports night at the Crystal Ballroom. And among all the sports dignitaries, there's Jackie Robinson and a man by the name of Jim McCusker. And they were literally sitting next to each other. Now, I knew Jim McCusker for 30 years, and I had many conversations over a sandwich, roast beef sandwich, but I never knew that Jim McCusker had the opportunity to sit next to Jackie Robinson on that night. So I never, sadly, he passed a few years ago, and I never got to ask him what he remembers, what they talked about, and but I was blown away that Jamestown's favorite son, Jim McCusker, NFL champion, but a guy that most of us know is just the owner of one of the best places in town. He actually shared the dais with one of the most iconic athletes, both and social activists of our time.
So the sports dinners, Randy, went from 1952 to '77, I think was the time period.
That's right, Greg.
And what can you tell me, and Cy Goldman, from the owner of WJTN, was really the rock star behind that. He was able to get the talent.
He was the talent chairman, that's right.
And just I guess a little backdrop is I got a hold of Cy's file. We have them. And it shows how he worked it. He worked many angles from many ways to get the talent that he got, which was incredible. 1956, though, talk about a little bit about maybe some of the other people who were there and a little bit about what happened, because I know you wrote the book.
Well, it's funny for a couple of young guys like Scott and I to be down here talking about something.
How are you feeling, guys?
No, seriously, Greg. We've got Mr. Jamestown, Russ Dietrich, sitting in the audience, who was probably there that night. And it's silly for you. And I'm quite certain you were there with your video camera, Greg, and you're just withholding that information. But
my book's coming out later.
yeah, your book's coming out later. But the Toastmaster in 1956 was Dizzy Trout, a pitcher for the Detroit Tigers. And someday you need to ask Russ Dietrich about his personal connection to Dizzy Trout. But anyway, much like Lucy was the rock star of the entertainment world, Jackie Robinson was the rock star of the sports world. This is in '56, so he broke in with the Dodgers in '47. So this is toward the tail end of his career, but he was still the man. And he's, as Scott said, he sat at the head table right next to Jim McCusker, who was then playing at the University of Pittsburgh. So I think Jim was a senior that year at Pittsburgh. And just outside the door is a framed copy of the Jamestown Post-Journal from that day.
it shows the article written by sports editor Frank Hyde, in which he talks about Jackie Robinson's message of racial justice. 800 people were at that sports dinner at the Hotel Jamestown. Think about that.
Well,
Go ahead. Go, Scott.
no, I was just reading Frank Hyde's account. Back in those days, these athletes were accustomed to going to such things, and I think if I have the history right, they would go like from Syracuse to Rochester to Buffalo to Jamestown to Erie, and because these guys weren't making a ton of money back then, so this was a nice way to supplement their income. So basically, they would have a dinner, sign some autographs, and then they get up and tell jokes. But if you read Frank Hyde's account in the Post-Journal from that next morning or that next day's paper, Jackie Robinson took it upon himself, and thankfully he did, to really make a political statement about the inequalities that existed in the time. And the first time I ever read that, it was like, wow. He didn't just tell a few jokes and sit down. And Frank did a marvelous job of the account that he wrote for the next day's paper. And I'm so glad that he did, because it just demonstrates the kind of things that Jackie encountered his entire professional life. And he was an activist after he retired. I think 56 was his last season, I believe, or 57. And it was just remarkable in the way that my mentor, I never worked for Frank, but he was a true trailblazer as a sports editor. There's no way I could have done that justice, and he fortunately put together quite a piece on what Jackie had to say that night.
If you're interested in reading Jackie Robinson's own words that night, as reported by Frank Hyde, you can go to the Chautauqua Sports Hall of Fame website, which is chautauquasportshalloffame.org, and you can look up our newsletter button and look for the March 2018 newsletter. And I've excerpted Frank's reporting and Jackie Robinson's words right there, so you can read what Jackie had to say about racial justice in
Greg,
1956.
One more thing is, there's no way that we could have a sports night like we're put on for 30-some years. And to think that on the same night that we have some of the sports celebrities that were there that evening, to have the two most iconic entertainers also at that banquet. I mean, Jamestown, N.Y. was the center of the universe that evening, and to think that, it would never happen. We can't get one athlete to come to Jamestown for less than tens of thousands of dollars. And so, it's purely remarkable, and it's so cool. I didn't realize till I read Chris's book that they literally had the sports dinner the same night as the ball. I don't know how logistically you could get people in and out of there, and how many people stayed for both. I mean, it's entirely possible, but what an evening.
Greg, let me make one last comment, and then we'll get out of your hair. But you've talked briefly about Chris and his dad, Ted. I just want the audience to know what a great athlete Chris's dad, Ted, was. In fact, he is an inductee. He's one of 191 inductees in the Chautauqua Sports Hall of Fame. And you can read about Ted's terrific athletic career, again, by looking on the Chautauqua Sports Hall of Fame website.
And for $100, you can go up and Randy will sign the one he has. Make it payable to the Chautauqua Sports Hall of Fame. Ladies and gentlemen, Randy Anderson. The Chautauqua Sports Hall of Fame recognizes great sports individuals, and the one they forgot to recognize yet, but certainly will happen, is the guy I want to call up next, and that's George Panabianco. While he's coming up, George, if you don't know him, is an incredible attorney at Lewis & Lewis and is the president of the National Comedy Center. He is an amazing guy, involved in a lot of community activities, and we're blessed to have many people who are here in the audience, but let's count George Panabianco as one of them.
Thank you very much, Greg. First, we do have a special amount of gratitude to give Chris. You know, nothing could describe it better tonight than how he got emotional about Jamestown. And it really warms all of our hearts here, because I've known Chris since we were little kids. And I would be here tonight just every time Chris comes into town. But to see what he did with the book, to see his passion for Jamestown, we all have a debt of gratitude to Chris for being literally the biggest champion of Jamestown, New York. So we should give Chris another round of applause for that. My job tonight was to tell you about the continuing legacy of Lucy, and most importantly, to talk about the National Comedy Center. And unlike most attorneys, I'm going to make my words very few. The best.
Did you take offense with that, Greg?
Can you send me a copy of that, Ed?
Yeah, mark the record.
What I'm going to tell you is, Lucy, when I became involved with the National Comedy Center, and back then it was called the Lucy Desi Center, we talked about the lifespan of Lucy and all of her work, but we also talked about her conversation with us. And she said, don't create something about me. Create something about the art of comedy. Celebrate the entire art. Celebrate all of the different performers and all the different people that have come through. And that would be my chosen legacy, not just a museum with artifacts about me itself. So that's what we've done at the National Comedy Center. And I'm going to let Ed start a video here in just 1 second. This is a video about the National Comedy Center that's going to open in August. What I'm going to tell you right now, I can't think of anything more exciting for our community than the National Comedy Center. And what I hope all of you do is I hope all of you get a chance to go through the facility. It's going to open up the first weekend in August. But one other thing before the video starts, here's what you also don't know about Chris, is that yes, he wrote the book, and yes, he's an attorney, and he's a tremendous father and husband. But behind the scenes, Chris played a role in the National Comedy Center. And every time we needed something, we would call, and Chris somehow would get his foot in the door. He would somehow get us into a meeting or somehow get us into a phone call. To go so far, just to give you one example, you know, we're trying to get credibility within the comedy community, and out of nowhere, who gets us a meeting with Billy Crystal? No one other than Chris Olsen. Okay. So, for every brick that's laid and for every success we've had, the Jamestown community should be very proud of what we're about to open up. And no small part was Chris's role in that. And again, we thank you for that.
Thank you, George.
But without saying any more, I said I'd be a man of few words. What I want you to do is pay attention to the video, because these are national people, national attention, and it's all going to come to Jamestown, New York in 2 months.
To honor comedy. And this National Comedy Center is the answer to that.
It's one of the most important establishments that we could have on a national level.
Comedy is an art form. So somebody who's got an affection toward comedy has a place to go. I'm thrilled to be a part of it.
When I heard that they were going to build this National Comedy Center, I thought, hasn't someone done this yet?
Unbelievable. But I think you picked the right place, Jamestown.
Comedy great Lucille Ball envisioned a dream for her hometown of Jamestown, New York, to become a destination for the celebration of comedy. The end result will be one of the most technologically advanced and interactive experiences of its kind.
It's important that something like a National Comedy Center exists, because comedy is such a window into our society and our cultural history.
Unfortunately, the nature of comedy is that it's temporal. Jokes don't generally stand the test of time. So it becomes important for a place like this to sort of go, let me give you a context for these people so you can appreciate their work.
this is going to be a national attraction. That's why we're going to put in $14 million into this complex that becomes known around the country as a national comedy center.
There are people that would go to the National Comedy Center like you would take someone that liked baseball to Cooperstown. It's the same idea, and the upside is pretty huge.
It's not a Hall of Fame, but is a comprehensive appreciation of the art. And it's not only stand-up, but all kinds of comedy.
It's an experience versus a Hall of Dead guys, and that's what we need.
The National Comedy Center is more than a static museum. It's an experience designed to instill an appreciation for this art form and its artists. Upon entry, each visitor will have an opportunity to create a sense of humor profile that personalizes interactions across the exhibits.
The whole idea of the National Comedy Center is the key to unlock this mystery. It's like, this is what's behind that mic and that man or woman.
I think if men got their period, we'd have a 3-week work month.
Finally, America can celebrate this thing that is as common as oxygen. We should focus on and celebrate it if we can celebrate these other things, like how far people can throw balls.
I guarantee you it'll be a standard and a staple in everybody's conversation about comedy.
Jamestown, you guys have been so much fun, man. Thank you for having me.
And a lot of people are going to be showing up in Jamestown.
Well, now they want to decriminalize marijuana in Washington, D.C., huh? You thought Congress was slow to act before. Oh, my God.
The Comedy Center is important because, you know, history belongs to those who write it.
With over 50 immersive exhibits, you can celebrate comedy in all its forms, all while learning and laughing together. Doors open in August 2018. To find out more, visit nationalcomedycenter.org.
Thank you, George, for sharing that. It's so exciting, and that is the legacy. When you think about what has transpired here, from the mayor talking about Lucille Ball, born in Jamestown. Yes, she spent some time in Cell Run, but born in Jamestown. And to working her way historically into New York City, back, gathering a real reputation, coming here in 1956, bringing along her husband Desi, who kisses what was your mother, which leads to a book, which is, everybody will now have that on their coffee table. It's just, and then to have the legacy find itself in this continuum into the National Comedy Center is really exciting for our community. We're always looking for feel-good stories, and this is the ultimate feel-good story.
In answer to the question you asked me first, Greg, so the kind of the takeaway, I just kind of crystallized while George was talking about all the great things that are happening here in town. And I was talking with Kurt Johnson yesterday, and we had kind of a similar theme going with some of the video clips he puts up. And what I'd like to leave you with is we create our own stories, individually and as a community. And what I love about everyone you heard from tonight, from the mayor to Greg to all these great men to George to everyone that spoke and even those that haven't that I talked to out in the lobby, is Jamestown has its swagger back. And as someone that doesn't live here, it was discernible, it was noticeable. And it's important because the people in the 50s wrote that book that we're celebrating today. But everyone in this room can contribute a chapter or a line or a verse towards the next book on Jamestown. And some crazy kid down the road is going to write one about this time in Jamestown's history and the formation of the National Comedy Center and all the things that bring the swagger back to Jamestown. And there's so many wonderful things going on here. Let's celebrate that. Let's repeat it. If comedy's not your thing, think of some other way to contribute. Or maybe it is your thing, you just don't know. Go find out. And, you know, I just want to tip my hat back to George because in talking with him, I don't know how many law offices he runs, but it's like 3 to 5. And then he does the Comedy Center, and he's always there in the community. He's coached Little League for 20 years, even though he doesn't have a kid in Little League. And I'll call him on the phone. I'm like, George, it's like 11 because I'm 3 hours earlier. And, yeah, I just got to drop some tickets off for somebody at the St. Bonnie's basketball game. And, you know, I don't know how he's got so much energy, but it's that type of passion that drives the future of our town. And I appreciate you all being here tonight. You all contribute a verse. You all write the next chapter at Jamestown. And similar to the sign that I saw on the wall, I'll leave you with a couple stories. When I needed help, people from Jamestown show up. So Marlene and Mary said, we'll make cookies. Okay, John does a poster, and somebody's doing the blow-ups, and Joe Caprino's going to come sing for you guys while we have a couple cocktails from Gialli's and play some Frank Sinatra music. And George comes and clears his schedule. And everybody, that's what Jamestown does. We show up, we participate, and we create our own story. So thank you for being here, and let's enjoy some good music.